Guilty. The former president of the United States, Donald Trump, found guilty on 34 different counts related to paying off Stormy Daniels in a hush money case. How you doing? My name is Rob Hunter. Mike Russell is on vacation. So I thought I would jump on here and say hi and see what you think about this verdict, because this is all right now about narratives. Who's going to control the story? Is it going to be Donald Trump, who clearly thinks that this whole situation, this entire trial in New York City, was rigged? In fact, the president saying today the entire country is rigged and you get to be the ultimate jury. That'll be coming up on November 5th. So that's one part of the narrative, the Donald Trump side. There is a secondary part of the narrative, which, of course, is the Democrat side and most of the media side. This is historic. So when the verdict came in, I did two things. First, I put on CNN. And CNN was as predictable as you could imagine, boring as you could imagine. Jake Tapper, the anchor, was doing the typical, this is a historic moment for America. And he went over to Anderson Cooper. Anderson Cooper standing outside that courtroom. Anderson Cooper said the same thing. This is a very dark day. But if you see right here on this MSNBC tweet, this is what matters. Not the narratives of neither side, because that's what America basically is. That's what any communication channel is. It's a narrative. It is propaganda. It is designed to get you to believe it. This tweet right here says it all. Donald Trump knew this was coming. He knew he was going to be found guilty. I knew it as soon as the jury was in. They only deliberated for about 12 hours. Usually, the faster a jury deliberates, the guilty verdict comes in. So, but Donald Trump knows right now the guilty verdict is in. He's got a couple of routes. One, appeal, which he will do. Second is run on this story. Because Donald Trump, like him or not, is prepared for moments like this. He always rises to that television occasion. He always just reacts to what's in front of him. And that's one of those personal development tools that people like Donald Trump and others use. Reality is reality. And that's what I want to get into today, just quickly. Got about 20 minutes before I have to jump off, but I did want to say hi, and I did want to see how you guys were doing with this verdict. Greg has checked in saying he's pissed. Trump 2024 more than ever. Nancy's here. Grizz, how you guys doing? And I think if you expand out on this idea about 2024 and we all get to have a say, the question is, what do we have a say about? Because I have 3 books in front of me, of which there are many more, but I just happen to have these 3. One I've showed you before. And this is where my narrative comes in that's different than the traditional media narrative comes in. CNN, historic moment. And after I flipped on CNN, I went over to Fox News, and Fox News is doing quite the opposite. Judge Jeanine Pirro was doing the typical, oh, it's rigged, the system is rigged, da-da-da-da-da-da. I get it. These are narratives that have already been established pre-verdict, pre-trial. So the guilty verdict does nothing to change the narrative. But let's look beyond that. Let's look bigger than Donald Trump for a moment. Let's look at the system that this country is. I'm going to start you with this one, books that I have here, just to prove this point. Because there is a consensus on one side. It's not really a consensus fully, but it's not even necessarily Trump supporters. It is, let's say, a side that thinks that these charges are ridiculous. So let's back up for just a second before we get to this book. The charge that Trump faced was two-pronged. And this is where it gets really tricky to me. The first part is a misdemeanor, and that misdemeanor is falsifying business records. It's a misdemeanor in the state of New York. That's what Trump was charged with. But they added a felony account to each one of those payments where Trump paid Michael Cohen back after Michael Cohen paid Stormy Daniels 130 grand to basically buy the story so it didn't appear in the National Enquirer that Trump and Stormy Daniels had an affair. You probably know that by now, but it's worth a recap. So that's what Trump was facing. The felony comes in, and this is also bizarre because the felony is about interfering in the election, 2016. which is interesting. And that's probably the appealable part because Trump trying to buy a story so that it doesn't run, so it didn't harm his chances to become president, is something that's been done numerous times throughout American history. So does that mean every time a politician lies or buys a story or spikes a story or gets a story to go away, is that interfering in an election? Because that's an interesting question. Because if you flip that around and you use the 2016 election, and again, I'm not picking sides here because reality is what reality is. In many ways, the former president brought this upon himself. But it's also because of a system we have in this country that is easily available to charge people with crimes. So I'm not trying to make excuses here. I'm not trying to defend Trump. I'm not trying to defend Hillary. But if you look at the 2016 election and you see what Donald Trump did, he didn't want a story about an affair coming out, so he paid someone money to keep that quiet. On the other side, Hillary Clinton bought and paid for a fake Russian dossier with made up intel in it that her campaign disseminated to the media. And you might remember that dossier because it had insanely salacious details in it about the former president, Donald Trump. So if Donald Trump is accused of interfering in an election with this, isn't Hillary Clinton? So that right there, in and of itself, questions the nature of these charges. But here's the thing. This has been coming for a long time. This has been known for a long time. Because I have this book, which I've showed you a couple weeks ago, called Mugged by the State: Outrageous Government Assaults on Ordinary People and Their Property. It is all about the power of the government to use to seize your car. One of the favorite examples I have in here in this book is about an elderly lady who bought a used car. Driving that used car one day, and the police pulled her over. The cop asked, "Hey, mind if I search the vehicle with my canine?" Woman's like, "Sure. I had nothing to hide. I don't do drugs. I'm not a drug dealer." But the dog found drug residue, the smell of it, in the back of a trunk in a hidden compartment that the woman didn't even know was there. The cop took her car anyways, because asset forfeiture is a big deal. Now, asset forfeiture, not exactly what Trump is charged with, but a sign as to what we see in this country. And this is why I find today so fascinating, is that everybody's outraged. Well, this book, Mugged by the State, I believe, I'm going to look, came out in 2003. So that's 21 years ago. So 21 years, we've known about tactics used by police, federal, state, local, to bust innocent people. So it's 21 years. We could have done something about it. I'm even going to go back even further here. I got to find when this book was come out. This is a history of the FBI. I'm going to do this one third. Before I get to that, one of my favorite theories about America right here: 3 felonies a day. See, and you'll notice the commonality here. Pull this one back up so you can see it. Outrageous government assaults on ordinary people. 3 felonies a day, how the feds target the innocent. And this ties into the Trump factor. Because over the last several years, decades, hundreds of years, parties, Republicans and Democrats, have passed laws. And the basis of that book, 3 felonies a day, is about this idea that you and I commit crimes every day that we don't even know about. And it's because the way lawmakers write laws. They're incredibly broad, incredibly vague, and they can be twisted and turned. And that's what you saw in the Trump case. And it was enough to convince that jury of 12 people that Trump was guilty on all 34 counts. Now a felon until pending appeal. But as of right now, he's a felon. So 3 felonies a day came out in 2009. So 15 years ago. So 2003, 2009, and then our third book, it's called Subversives: The FBI's War on Student Radicals and Reagan's Rise to Power. So this is a book that goes back into the 50s and the 60s, recommended by my man Slavo. And in this book, it details how the FBI used to investigate college professors, sneak into their offices without warrants, plan all kinds of things in there. So there has been plenty of evidence that our government has been out of balance for a very long time. So if you're on the side of the Trump narrative and you're like, "Oh my goodness, this is outrageous," I'm going to put Ted Cruz's tweet up here. because this seems to be the consensus on the Republicans. Of course, Ted Cruz is running for re-election, needs the Trump vote, so he naturally has to come in here and tell you that it's a dark day for America. But what I'm pointing out to you is one of these challenges of being a human. We always wait until it's too late to change because we've had 50 years to do something about this. 50 years to rein in government power to go after people. It's just that politicians like Ted Cruz have decided not to. So what they do in their failure to adjust the power structure in this country is they tweet and they pretend to be outraged. This entire trial has been a sham, Cruz writes, nothing more than a political persecution. The only reason they prosecuted Trump is because Democrats are terrified that he will win the election. And while that creates a great narrative, the real narrative is these books. The real narrative is the fact that politicians mostly focus on winning re-election. And this isn't a cool issue. It's not a fun issue to talk about government power. It's not an issue you can raise campaign funds from. But it is typical of a politician to avoid their own role in allowing this to happen, in passing laws like this, whether it be a state law like this one in New York or a federal law. And some of this all intertwines and gets complicated, but here's another example. Dan Crenshaw, he is one of the congressmen from the state of Texas. Disgraceful is the word that he used there. Activism and emotion, trampling long-standing judicial principles and standards. But I'm pointing out that that's not true. This is just a narrative, a talking point, because this book, 2012, this book, 2003, this book, 2009. Just 3 examples. There are hundreds of examples, thousands of examples. There are people who have been warning about this exact type of thing for many, many years. The idea here is to get upset early before something happens. The idea here is for us, you and me, your friends, the people that you talk to, whoever you share this with. The idea is to understand where this country is and how we all played a part in it, because we vote for these people. We put them in office. And we never really quite demand a change. A change that has been staring us in the face for years. So now maybe we get a change. Most likely we won't, because for half the country, maybe a little bit less than half the country, they're loving this. The Lincoln Project is one of those. And this is going to be the Democrats' main talking point going forward. You're going to hear convicted felon a ton until November. You're going to hear it everywhere. Donald Trump is a felon, a criminal who cannot vote for himself or possess a firearm. The Lincoln Project, which is a group of Republicans that doesn't like Trump, which is fine. I mean, that's part of the deal. It wasn't some deep state plan. It was the result of our institutions doing their job, our rule of law enduring. Technically, that's true. And that's the issue here, is that technically it is true. I wonder what it's going to take for us to understand and really discuss what type of government we want. Because today's a day to do that. It's a wake-up call. And again, this was a decision made by Trump and his campaign team. The way it was paid, technically illegal. I don't quite get the felony count here for interfering in an election, but this is what we have. And I just wish there would be a moment where we could all just be honest and we could all talk about the major challenges that we have ahead of us. Because this is what happens. The country gets founded. Freedom is established in 1789. It's coded into law via the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And from that moment, they start chipping away at those very rights. And they started to do it right away. So we're what? 1789 to now on 200 and what? 35 years of lawmaking. 235 years of creating agencies to investigate us, to create crimes for us to be guilty of. Because it used to be when you had a crime, there was harm. You can't really prove harm in this case. And some of the other cases that Trump is facing, I think, are far more severe. The Georgia one, for example, is the RICO case. That's Trump tried to steal an election. So it's worth keeping in mind the bigger picture, is the point in having this conversation, which I'm sure most of the media will not have with you because they'll run with their preconceived narratives that Trump's awful or Trump's amazing. But who cares about that, because Trump's going to be president or he's not going to be president. You have a vote, I have a vote. That's it. Maybe you're getting involved in a campaign. I'm actually helping my boy, Congressman David Schweikert, put some signs up. So I'm trying to do my part. But this is something that's bigger than just Trump. This is something, this conversation about power, about laws, about what government can do to innocent people. The evidence has been there for a long time. It's just that we as Americans don't want to look at it. Just want to go about our lives and think everything's fine. And that's cool because most of us never experience the law. Most of us never have this challenge, but we could have that challenge. And here's the other part about this that's fascinating. Defense, legal defense, and how much it costs. We have very limited resources in this country. Granted, there are more resources than most other countries. Our government takes in about $4.8 trillion in taxes, courtesy of the 2017 tax cut, which actually increased government revenue. Of that $4.8 trillion that we send to Washington, I have no idea how much has been spent investigating Donald Trump. Hours and hours. Time in prosecution office, expert witnesses, other things that you have to pay for. All been geared towards getting Donald Trump. And they finally got him. And again, I'm not here to defend Trump. I'm not here to castigate Trump. It is what it is. Trump knows what he's going to do. He's going to attack, because that's what he always does. And the Democrats are going to attack him as a convicted felon. It's pretty simple process. But I bring it back to this rational idea that we have more power than we think. But it requires us to do a little bit more thinking, a little bit more discussing. And I think, Grizz, you're exactly right. We're afraid of change. And we only really go through change when something impacts us. Usually it's super negative and we realize we hit rock bottom and we got to do something. And even that is hard. And I'm not saying that this is easy. But what I'm saying is the narratives that we see and hear in this country are not helping us as a country. They're not helping us be more free. They're not helping us live better lives. So here we are. Narrative game until November, with a bigger question about the nature of this country and where we're going and what we want to do about it. Because I find the problem to be the parties, both of them. I've never really liked either one of them. I've liked members of each party individually. But the more I study the party system, the more I zoom out and look up here and I look at our history. And the history that I mostly focus on is the history that I spent in talk radio, which started around the Bush-Gore election. I got my first talk radio job in September of 2000 and was hooked ever since. And that Bush-Gore election really started to interest me in politics because it was an election decided not necessarily by the voters, but by the Supreme Court. So that's interesting in and of itself. And as I started to dig in and I started to study the government and I started to study where we're at, I understood that we all live in a criminal justice system where any one of us could get charged with a crime. Any one of us could get found guilty for something if the government turned its resources on us. And to go back to the Trump factor, not only is there numerous resources of which you have paid for to go after Trump, Trump has to defend himself. And defending yourself, getting good lawyers is not affordable anymore. That's a whole nother challenge that we face in this country, is that the legal system is out of reach for me, for you. And I have a difficult time finding a good lawyer to fight against the government. And Trump gets the best lawyers. And this was a case filed in New York, knowing that the jury was not going to be Trump fans, knowing it was going to be easier to get a guilty verdict. And it worked because it's a strategy. Because when you have this power mechanism that you see before you, that I've just described in these 3 books, and in case you're just joining us, these are just the 3 I have. I've had many more that I've traded in, given back, given other people that prove this theory that we could have seen what was going to happen to someone like Donald Trump 20 years ago. I mean, I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I did. Subversives about the FBI and their unconstitutional activities. And the FBI is relevant here because they spied on Trump and his campaign. And again, I'm not here to defend Trump. What I am here to tell you about is how big the government is, how out of control it is, how power drunk that it is. Mugged by the state 21 years ago, 3 felonies a day 15 years ago. Since that Bush-Gore election, 9/11, ample opportunities for us to shift the way that we do government. Now, this could be another wake-up call. Because if you go back to the Bush-Gore election, you go back to 9/11, you go back to the decisions that were made after 9/11, you have Afghanistan, you have Iraq, you have an economic collapse in 2007. We elect President Obama in 2010, and the Democrats go straight partisan, and they give us Obamacare. Obamacare leads to the Tea Party. The Tea Party gathers attention. President Donald Trump 2012, 2013 starts getting political, appealing to the Tea Party, starts talking about Obama's birth certificate, starts getting on Fox News. Then at the end of the Obama term, the second term, Trump runs for president. Trump wins the presidency. Now, today, Trump found guilty 34 counts. First president to be found guilty of a crime. And it only ensures one thing. Donald Trump's going to be talked about for hundreds of years, which I think Donald Trump's goal was just that. So while Trump gets his goal, what about us? What about our country? What about how we want to be, how free we want to be, how much power we want the government to have? I was just reading about China, and we're going to talk about this maybe tomorrow on Russell and Hunter's The Brewmance at noon, how China spies on its citizens, not only with digital technology like phones, but also with a whole host of neighbors that spy on you and file reports. So here we are in America. And Kafil, I appreciate you jumping in from Morocco. And I appreciate your comments. How about that? Well, and that's, Kafil, what I'm trying to explain here for you, since you're in Morocco, is how our system got turned upside down. And it's been that way for a long time. It's just not been so apparent to so many Americans. Maybe now it is. So this really next question is going to be about what can you do about it? When candidates are running for office, we can ask them different questions. We can show up at town hall meetings. Because I go back to Ted Cruz. And is this Ted Cruz's second term as a senator? So he's 11 years, almost 12 years into this. So he's had 11 or 12 years as a senator to do something about this. Because all I see out of people like Ted Cruz, and I remember Mike and I had this debate, Mike Russell, my main man. We had this debate on Russell and Hunter a few months ago. Or I guess it was, a year or so ago. Ted Cruz had a Senate hearing. He was at one. And he was talking to the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. And he was all upset. And he staged this whole show. And the question I always ask is, what's happening after the show? Are you going to hold anyone in the Department of Homeland Security accountable? Because you have to remember, Congress has oversight over the federal government. Congress does have power. The House of Representatives has the power of the purse. There are things that could be done to shake things up. They just aren't done. So we have become a government of performers, of reality show hosts, including many on the Republican side. That's what's just as distressing to me, is that we have these monumental challenges, one of which we're talking about today. The scope, size, the power of the investigative governments. In this case, Trump's case, New York, the Southern District of New York, which represents New York City. In the broader case, the federal government. But nothing was done. This is why I find that both parties are the problem. because they give us lip service and that's it. All talk, no action. And we all know that action is better than talk. Action is better than words. Well, I haven't seen any action to try to create a narrative that it's time to redo the power in the United States. It's time to redo the power across the states. That's the conversation I want to have. That's the conversation that's necessary because that's one of the major problems that we face in this country, another being spending. In part, the spending investigating Trump, but that's part of that larger problem. We're what, 30, almost $5 trillion in debt. In the last year, we borrowed $3 trillion. It's just unsustainable. We don't want to talk about it because of the same exact reason. It's difficult to talk about. It's difficult to change. And we accept that shallow surface level narrative that you get from Dan Crenshaw. A disgraceful moment for our country. Wow. Thanks for the great analysis. You see what I'm getting at here? It's all very predictable. It's meant to drive you outrageous. It's meant to get you to fundraise. It's meant to manipulate you, essentially. Meanwhile, these big problems that you assume senators and representatives in Congress would work on, they just aren't working on. Ask Congressman Schweikert about the spending and who he gets to talk to about that and who listens to him. Nobody does. He said there are maybe a handful that get it. The others don't care. So we have a government that doesn't even care about the major problems that we're facing. Power being one, money being the other. Money, power, vanity. Because that third factor, the vanity to the politician, is what keeps them in power. So my point in coming on here with you today is to get us to think differently about how we approach voting, how we talk about the candidates, how we can create a narrative that isn't the surface level, media driven, emotional narrative because it's not good for the country. It's not a public service. And I always viewed my role in the media as that. When you sign on as a talk show host, your job is to inform people as best you can about what's happening in this country, about where we're at as a country and whether or not we want to continue to live in a country like this. Not necessarily to move to Mexico or Canada or Fiji, but to start righting the ship, start creating that different narrative that isn't geared towards one of the parties winning instead of it being about you winning. Because, yeah, sure, there are some good things that happen all the time in this country. And because there are good things that happen in this country, it's almost as if we can sneak these bad things in the back door so nobody even notices until something like this happens. So there's going to be another thing that happens, another big thing, whether it is the Social Security Trust Fund running out of money, almost there, 8 years or so, going to be a big change in Social Security. 3 years or so, we're going to be in so much debt, it's going to be really difficult to do anything about it. And then there's the power. What does this open up for future presidents? Because we have already seen that when Democrats do something first, Republicans do it next. There is no restraint anymore. And that was one of the hallmarks of the George Washington presidency was restraint. He could have stayed in office past his second term. Could have been buried under the Capitol. But he didn't want any of that because he had restraint. And I think that is missing from what we see in Washington right now. That is missing from what we see in many states, in part because it's being driven by narrative. Because the more communication we have, the more boring it gets. The more boring it gets, the more outrageous it gets so that it's not boring. It's just how information works. So we get these statements that don't mean anything, like Donald Trump's a felon, a criminal who possesses a firearm, or stone cold, or disgraceful, or dark day for America. It's all the same on repeat. But what's also the same is the challenges that lie ahead. And every day, they get bigger and bigger and bigger. And every day that we sleep, and every day that we don't have these conversations, the problem just gets bigger. So let today be an example of what happens when you see a problem, we collectively see a problem, and we don't do the things necessary to raise awareness. Raising awareness is how you change things. And Rhonda, you're exactly right. Politicians crave celebrity. They love that vanity. They love that their tweet is retweeted 1,000 times, even though it's mostly bots. Whew. Interesting times in America, isn't it? But look, I'm optimistic. I'm always hopeful. This is America. This is the land where you can be free to be who you want to be. Now, there is still that opportunity for you, and that's the best opportunity. That's that key, is that balance where we're supposed to have the power, not them. So, guys, thanks for joining me. I just wanted to pop on real quick, given the fact that this was breaking news. I do have to run, but I'll be back tomorrow at noon for Russell and Hunter's The Brewmance. We call it the Nooner because why not? Mike won't be here, but we're going to have some fun. Richard Dreyfuss, we're going to talk about. Richard Dreyfuss made some comments, and they're good. And we'll probably talk some more about this too. Trump guilty, 34 counts. He's now pending appeal, a felon. Dark day for America. Look, you already know the narratives. Go create your own. My name is Rob Hunter. This is the Brewmance. Thanks for hanging. We'll see you real soon, as in tomorrow at noon. Cheers.